this is Erica from Acton, Mass. On Sunday, the Boston Globe reported on how newly elected women state reps are fighting to be heard. I'm going to share with you all the video footage of the ugly misogyny, bullying, and intimidation that is tragically emblematic of the Massachusetts State House's culture. Many of us have known for ages that our State House is broken. Power is extremely concentrated with Speaker DeLeo and the few reps who make up House leadership, and how they enforce their utterly broken way of creating laws behind closed doors is frankly shocking. We saw this play out in the open when these women state reps stood up and fought against giving corporations tax breaks. Let's start with some context. Last week, House leadership gave state reps 5 hours to review and propose amendments to this 50-page bill called the supplemental budget. This bill was especially complicated because it had multiple sections pertaining to the IRS tax code. Even worse, the next day, the public had 4 workday hours to respond to both this complex bill and 96 amendments that were filed before they started voting. Now, despite the unreasonably short timeline House leadership forced on us, a few really good amendments were filed. Most importantly, Amendment number 60, which removed an estimated $37 million tax break for corporations from the budget. This is a no-brainer amendment. When the tea is on fire, public transportation is severely underfunded, and we desperately need to fund our schools, the last thing I want to see is a tax break for corporations that do not need it. Massachusetts has one of the lowest corporate tax rates in the country, and if we taxed corporations at the average rate of all 50 states, we would have $2.7 billion to fund our schools and public transportation. So here's what happened. Rep. Maria Robinson of Framingham filed Amendment number 60 and gave a speech in favor of it. Less than a minute into her speech, Rep. Denise Garlick of Needham interrupted Rep. Robinson to, quote, yield for a question. Now, yielding for a question is a disingenuous way to fluster and trick a state rep to give up their time to speak. But don't take that from me. Take it from a member of leadership, Rep. William Strauss, chairman of the Transportation Committee, who was similarly asked to yield for a question earlier this year.
We're talking about the selection of a speaker. Pretty important stuff.
Chair apologizes to the gentleman at the microphone. For what purpose does the gentleman rise?
For what purpose does the gentleman rise?
For what purpose does the gentleman rise? Does the gentleman yield?
Gentleman does not yield.
Gentleman does not yield. The chair recognizes Mr. Strauss of Mattapan.
And for the new members, as you begin your education in the rules, there is only yielding. There is no such thing as yielding for a question. There's only yielding the floor.
When Rep. Strauss states there is no yielding for a question, there is only yielding, yielding means you are giving up your chance to give a speech. If you yield, there is no guarantee you get the floor back. Now, let's compare that to what happened with Rep. Robinson. Notice the difference in how she is treated by both Rep. Garlick, who interrupts her, and by Rep. Paul Donato of Medford, who is overseeing the session.
Estimates show that the Commonwealth would miss out on upwards, according to Mass Budget, of $37 million of tax revenue through this decoupling. What concerns me greatly is that this language...
Chair, what purpose does the gentlelady rise?
Mr. Speaker, will my colleague yield for a question?
Does the lady yield for a question?
May I finish first? And then?
Does the lady yield?
No.
Recognizes Ms. Robinson of Framingham.
What?
Chair recognizes, does the gentlelady yield? Chair recognizes Ms. Robinson of Framingham.
Let's be clear, Rep. Donato has had his job for almost 20 years, and Rep. Garlick has had hers for almost 10. Both of them fully understand, like Rep. Strauss said, yielding for a question isn't a thing. And yet, Rep. Donato let Rep. Garlick continue to insist on cutting off Rep. Robinson's speech. To top it off, watch how Rep. Garlick tries to smear Rep. Robinson right after her speech.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is striking to me in a chamber in which we speak of collegiality and respect that an individual would not yield for a question.
This is a ridiculous accusation. Rep. Robinson wasn't being disrespectful, she was merely following standard procedure. Rep. Garlick's indignation and anger towards Rep. Robinson refusing to obediently step aside is honestly something I too have experienced so often as an Asian American woman trying to merely assert myself where I belong. It is an experience that women of color are all too familiar with when they don't obey the demands of white people in power. But it doesn't end there. After Rep. Garlick's disingenuous speech defending corporate tax breaks, Rep. Mark Cusack of Braintree also spoke in favor of corporate tax breaks by arguing for a, I quote, trickle-down effect.
And there is a trickle-down effect anytime you allow something like this to happen.
I'm sorry, Rep. Cusack, but the 80s called, and they want their failed Reagan-era slogans back. Now, what happened immediately after is the most damning part. The other two women reps, who were the lead sponsors of this amendment, Rep. Lindsay Sabadosa of Northampton and Rep. Tami Gouveia of Acton, were silenced when they tried to give their speeches. Both had informed the clerk in advance that they wanted to speak on their amendment, and yet Rep. Donato completely silences them by talking loudly over them, shouting from the floor.
And I ask my colleagues to join me in rejecting this amendment. Thank you.
Roll call machine is now open. Remain open for 3 minutes. Court officers, some of the members indicate a roll call is in progress. Roll call machine is now open. Remain open for 3 minutes. Court officers, some of the members indicate a roll call is in progress.
This is insane. These reps shouldn't have to shout Mr. Speaker at the top of their lungs to speak on their own amendment. The rules clearly state that by merely standing up, Rep. Donato must acknowledge them. You can't see it in the footage, but any rep can tell you they were both standing with Rep. Sabadosa shouting at the top of her lungs to get his attention. This is not what a public debate over something as significant as $37 million in corporate tax breaks should look like. This is not how laws should be made or voted on. And finally, it is disgusting how the women who stood up against corporate tax breaks were treated by leadership. Fortunately, Rep. Robinson did not concede. She didn't give up her time on the floor, and she forced a recorded roll call vote on this controversial corporate tax break. Thanks to her work, we have a recorded vote on this amendment. Did your state rep stand with these 3 women reps who are challenging the state house's broken culture by putting up a fight against $37 million in corporate tax breaks? See the list below. If your rep isn't on that list, they voted to keep $37 million in corporate tax breaks. Tell them how you feel about that and ask them why they didn't stand with their colleagues who are fighting to fix this deeply broken state house. We should expect all our state reps to do what Rep. Robinson, Rep. Gouveia, and Rep. Sabadosa did by fighting for amendment number 60.